Welcome to another episode of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Hildabrand, and today we're diving into a groundbreaking topic that every gardening enthusiast will love, the innovative and transformative world of self-wicking containers and raised bed gardening. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Steve Higgins, an expert from the University of Kentucky's Biosystems and Engineering Department. Get ready to join us as we uncover the thrilling fundamentals of self-wicking gardening. We'll guide you through designing and installing these ingenious systems, mastering effective irrigation methods, and discovering the best plants to thrive in your garden. So grab your gardening gloves and let's explore self-wicking gardening together.
Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. This gardening show will equip and inspire avid gardeners with tips and tricks to help them navigate the gardening world. The show will also highlight specific growing requirements for seasonal plants, so the sun will shine brighter over their Kentucky garden. And now, here's that ray of sunshine, garden enthusiast and horticulture extension agent, Kristin Hildabrand, with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.
All right, welcome back to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, and joining here in with us today is Dr. Steve Higgins. How are you, Dr. Higgins?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, so I'm excited that you're here because this is National Gardening Month, and we are gearing up for gardening.
Yes, it is that time of the year.
It is. People are really antsy about getting outside.
I am too.
Yeah, me too. And so with that, I feel like people are maybe looking at some improvements. Maybe they have some raised beds, or maybe they're looking at raised beds.
Yes.
And one of those topics that we have you on the podcast today is to talk about self-wicking containers and also raised beds.
Yes.
So explain that a little bit more.
So the self-wicking part is basically you create a raised bed that has an impervious bottom in it. And then basically what you can do is you can hold a certain water table in there that basically the roots of the plants that you're growing, the veggies and whatnot, can actually find this water table, and then they self-water themselves for like as long as that water reserve lasts. And so you can build I'm building some of these raised beds now that hold 300 gallons worth of water, which allows me to basically do my job and do these nighttime talks and whatnot. And I'm watering basically once a week. Really helps out. For those people that maybe miss a couple of days and their plants start hurting, this eliminates that.
I was going to say, it's really fascinating. And, with these containers and also raised beds, a lot of times they wick away a lot of moisture. But if you look at this self-wicking raised bed, it does provide a lot of advantages to gardeners.
A lot of advantages. So the raised beds themselves, since they're elevated, that provides ergonomics, and that's easier for older people like me and whatnot to continue to farm. And then I've made some other iterations or blueprints for wheelchair accessible type beds, something that might be useful for independent or assisted living places, or those that are getting up in age and want something that's more ergonomically designed. What I really like about these things is for growing tomatoes, because you raise your tomatoes and then they're looking really good. They're almost vine ripened and whatnot, or just before. And then all of a sudden we'll get an inch or two of rain and they split. Well, when you raise them in raised beds, they constantly have access to this water. So it can rain 2.5 inches in an hour and you're not going to have a problem with your tomatoes. And that's what I really like about this, as well as, taking care of the other plants. And I think it also reduces a lot of stress because it always has water. And then if you got the nutrients right, then you have plants that aren't going to be as prone to insect damage and diseases because they're not, screaming that they're under stress.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, what made you want to go this route for self-wicking containers, raised beds? Because, I've kind of heard about it, but not really practiced it myself.
I probably started this about 12 years ago. I just wanted to get back into gardening again, and with work interfering and stuff like that, there was that. And so then I just started playing around with different designs. I actually started off with 5-gallon buckets. I was raising one broccoli plant in a 5-gallon bucket with this wicking technology. And then I shifted over and I kept getting bigger, and I started doing the protein tubs for like cattle feeding and stuff like that. And then I thought, well, that takes a lot of time to water, a dozen of these containers. So then I started going with the big wooden raised beds that I would line with an impervious material, and it went from there. Next thing you know, I got a dozen of these things in my backyard, and I'm rolling on, and I had really good production out of it. The squash and zucchini just goes nuts because those leaves are huge, and those plants absorb and give off a lot of moisture.
Yeah, I really like that you do it yourself. Like you said, you travel quite a bit and you have a lot of talks that you give for the university.
Yes. So I miss out on that opportunity to do my gardening and stuff like that. The other component that I love about this is the weeding or the lack thereof. The soil that I'm building these beds with is very friable, as it should be. And so what I find is I might pull out a little crabgrass, might get started in there, and let's say it's 1.5 inches tall. I'll pull that thing out easily, and it'll have a couple of roots on it, but it'll have a taproot that's going 18 inches down into this water table, which is really interesting to me. I mean, it knows what it's doing. So yeah, eliminating weeds and not having weeds, because you're not doing a surface watering. You're watering from below, which is how we should be watering anyway. Mm-hmm. And that way you get the roots that go down. And if you do the surface watering, then you're going to have all your roots on the surface, which is okay for nutrient uptake and stuff like that. But the water is a different issue.
Yes. Explaining all about this, about self-wicking containers and also raised beds, what are some of the mechanics? You know, like whenever I think of raised beds, I think of a 4x8 space. But like you said, to have that permeous surface area, what does that look like in the bottom of these raised beds?
So in the bottom, so basically, let's say I do a 4x10 bed, let's just say, and I'll make it probably about 2 feet tall. Okay, so basically the bottom foot of it is basically going to be a material basically of perforated pipe. So the perforated pipe is laying all across the bottom, and then basically your soil is on top of it. So the perforated pipe is supporting the soil where your plants are growing, but the perforated pipe below is where the water is. So it's like a two-chambered kind of a system. And then what happens is I'm using peat moss as the initial stuff that I put down because of its wicking potential. You know, peat moss can absorb like 2.5 times its weight in water. So it's really a good material for pulling up that water. So if I have my water table at, say, 12 inches below the plants, then the water that's interfacing with the soil is going to wick up into that soil by about 8 or 9 inches. And it's just by capillary action. I mean, so it's just small particle sizes just wicks up that water. And then the roots find it, and then there you go. Now, when you first start out your planting, like let's say you were transplanting some broccoli plants or you're starting some seeds or something like that, you would need to do the traditional watering that you would need to do in order to get it established, in order for those roots to find the water table. Once they find it, you're pretty much done with surface watering. And then I just drop a hose into the fill tube, and it fills it up, and then it's going to overflow at a certain level, so there's no chance of waterlogging these plants. The other thing I like about it is just the comprehensive system of I'm harvesting water off the roof of the house where I live, and I'm using it to water my garden. And so that's essentially cost-free, you know, after I pay for the water harvesting component of it. But why would you want to pay, a penny a gallon for chlorinated water when that's not what plants want?
Right, exactly. So you said that you don't have to water for like maybe a one time a week.
About a week. So as an example, I might have like, again, say 9 or 12 inches of water in one of these beds. So just example, all right, so a 4x10 bed with a foot of water in it is 40 cubic feet. And so then when you multiply that times 748, which is basically number of gallons per cubic foot, we're looking at about 300 gallons worth of water. Now, and that again, so let's say I have 9 inches of water in there. Well, normally when, like we're raising corn, we just need 1 inch a week, when we got corn going. And so theoretically, those beds should last me 9 weeks. But no, it doesn't. It's a confined space. And so that's the water that it has. So you have to kind of keep track of it. And then also the nutrients, the roots aren't going to be as extensive to be able to pull in potassium from way out and stuff like that. So whatever fertility you have in there, you need to monitor that as well.
Yeah, so you just kind of monitor that fill tube that you were talking where you put the hose in?
So the fill tube, yeah. So basically, I have an overflow tube that tells me when the thing is overflowing, but also basically put a dipstick. And I built a dipstick that goes in there, which is basically a level monitor. And so when that dipstick gets up to the full mark, I don't put any more water in. And again, I can also tailor make these beds if I want to. So let's say I want to do some succulents, like some butter crunch lettuce or something like that. Well, I can actually build a bed that'll have a higher water table in it to keep the root system of that lettuce wet and moist for them to proliferate really well. But when you get into some other plants, your peppers and stuff like that, well then, yeah, you don't have to have that water table near as high.
I was going to say, talk to us a little bit about the cost, because I know some people may have some questions about the cost of these.
And so the cost is, we actually just built some beds just the other day. We could have done a 4x10 bed easily, and it was around $350. And of course, the lumber is probably 275 of that, or something like that. There are some liners that you can get. You can do the big box stores, Lowe's, and some of the hardware stores will have some liners in certain sizes. There's obviously better liners than others. We're getting into these materials, t-shirts or shirts, the wicking and all that kind of stuff. So the technology of those fabrics is really picking up. So you can get some cheap fabrics that you can use. I don't know how well they'll hold up. The more expensive stuff is definitely your Firestone rubber material, which is very expensive. And that's what, either one of these is what they use for lining ponds. And that's pretty much the application here.
I was going to say, as far as like maintenance goes too for these, like I know you've mentioned several vegetables. If somebody wanted to do perennials and stuff, do you think it would be fine?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I've used a lot of the containers, the protein tubs for growing petunias. I love my petunias. And so, they work out really well. And again, the petunias do really good because they're constantly getting water. This situation where you go in, you'll go to a nursery or something like that, and they are watering these hanging petunia baskets every day because it leaks out. Well, with this, that water's not leaking out, but you're not drowning the plant. So it's always got access to moisture and water, and so they do very, very well. Yeah, absolutely. You can do just anything you want to do in these things.
I was going to say, I know you've been all throughout the state, and you've been talking a lot about these self-wicking containers and raised beds. When you see the crowd that you're speaking to, what is their reactions generally?
They're like, wow, this is a really good idea. Another common one is, why didn't you come up with this sooner? Kind of thing. And then some people, I guess, the last training that I did, most people were just like, wait a minute. They were like looking at the overflow hose the tube, which is basically just a 1/2 inch outside diameter vinyl tube that we use to basically take care of the excess water. So basically I'll put that tube in right at the top of my perforated pipe. And so that's all the water that this bed is going to have. So they were like, that's all it takes? And I'm like, yeah, this is it. And the wood part, as an example, the beds that we built in the last couple of weeks for the trainings, I'm using treated lumber, 2x treated lumber. And a lot of gardeners don't like to use treated lumber, and probably rightfully so. But treated lumber is not treated lumber anymore since they took the arsenic out in like 2007. So those boards would be susceptible to wood rot from moisture from the soil. So what you're doing is you have a liner between the soil and the lumber. So there's no exchange of any kind of chemicals or anything like that. There's no wood rot that's going to go on. I'm using 2x6, 2x8, 2x10 lumber because anything less than that, 2x4s are not ground treated lumber, ground contact lumber. So basically, and the only ground contact you're going to have is just where the 2x is interfacing with the ground on the edge. The other thing I like about these things is, so I've got this designated bed. So let's say I do, again, another 4x10 bed, and I do it out of 3 2x8, so it's almost 24 inches tall. And so the liner for that, if I'm doing this on soil, I can actually dig out the soil and actually make it deeper with the liner if I got enough material. And so I can gain this excess water holding capacity, which would allow me to put in basically another layer of 4-inch perforated pipe in there to capture or hold, and retain more water.
I was going to say, it's really fascinating. And too, I appreciate you mentioning about a lot of times the treated lumber, there's a lot of questions about the creosote.
And the creosote with railroad ties, this would work well for those. I mean, if you wanted to do it out of 4x4s or 6x6s or just about anything. The other thing you can do is there's other opportunities because farmers, producers are very resourceful, and particularly when it comes to material choices and saving money. So using these, the protein tubs, which is basically a plastic tub, and just putting the infrastructure in and drilling a hole in the side and putting your soil in there, and it's already lined, essentially. Water troughs, for watering livestock would work just as well. Rubbermaid or galvanized material or whatnot, same thing.
I was going to say those Tartar Gate, and that I say that brand name just because it's in our area.
Yes, it is.
But, it's like you said, those are metal containers.
Yes, they are.
And so you can say that those are still okay, too.
I think so. I mean, if you submerge a galvanized container, basically you will leach out some zinc out of the galvanized, but zinc is basically a required nutrient for plants until it gets too high.
Gotcha.
Then you get some toxicities with the zinc, but it shouldn't be that much at all, I wouldn't think.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say, whenever you start, like I know you said that you've actually got several in your backyard.
Oh, yes.
So, like If you did, and I know you said the ones you've been building have been roughly about $350, is that kind of just for one raised bed?
One raised bed that's basically essentially a 4x10.
Okay. Well, you could kind of stagger that out too. Like you could start kind of with one and then gradually maybe improve.
Yes. Actually, it is kind of a short story. I actually interfaced with one of the guys at the shop where we're building some of these things, and they do a lot of fabrication for me. So they picked up on this. And so this guy's dad was like, I really like these things. And he shipped it. So he was doing raised beds with normal soil. And he's like, no, I'm moving away from that. This is really cool. And so it's interesting to hear that. And then the guy's wife was interested in the container type. So it's definitely catching on with the crowds once they hear about it. And again, once you do these trainings and stuff, people are like, wow, why didn't I think of this? And then we'll have people come up and they go, I have all these materials already at the house. My husband's building this as soon as I get home, kind of thing.
Well, it's really exciting when you look about the possibilities with these designs, and it does make it a lot simpler because a lot of people just don't have like a big tiller and, like all these other things like conventional garden spaces.
No, and for me, I'm operating out of Lexington. So a Lexington suburb is basically, in a new construction, they're going to scrape off all the topsoil. They're building on clay and building materials that they left behind. So I don't have any soil in my backyard to do gardening in the normal sense. And the way the developments are and stuff like that, I mean, I literally have a driveway of a pre-existing home that they just put sod over. And so I've got that to deal with. And so, so I don't have any soil. And so bringing in soil and doing these raised beds, I mean, I couldn't even get a shovel into the clay that I've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this possibility with these
opens things up, and it gives me a whole lot of productivity, which has led to a lot of freezing and canning and excellent meals. So and doing a lot of taste testing and things like that.
Oh yeah, any favorites that you have, Dr. Higgins, of some of the vegetables that you've harvested?
I mean, again, the fact that the squashes do so well. I mean, we've gotten so much productivity just off of one plant. And if you stagger your plants for the bugs and things like that, then, you can have a really high yield. I have noticed that the wicking beds create a lot of hairs on my carrots.
Really?
Which is indicative of having a high moisture content.
Well, and you think about that root vegetable, it goes down deep, and if it's already got the moisture down in there like that you're explaining, that is interesting.
Yeah, I'll have some every once in a while out of 12 carrots or something like that. I'll have some that will split, or something like that where they're just getting too much water. But again, the tomatoes is awesome. And then, mining the fertility and things like that, and blossom and rot, and making sure that your calcium's high. You can manage all that kind of stuff in these beds. My broccolis, green beans. Oh my gosh, yes.
I was going to say,
all of it.
Sounds like there's a lot of possibilities here.
There are.
And it does get exciting, especially when you're working with me as an agent, working with clientele and spreading the good information with these self-wicking raised beds and containers. Now, you have, time's kind of really flown by, but you've got some great resources that explain a little bit more about these topics too. Is that right?
The publications, that I have a publication on the raised bed, and I also have a publication on a container bed, or using the protein tubs. I haven't finished it yet. I don't know if there's a need for it, but I did start a design for a wheelchair accessible raised bed that would work for independent and assisted living type things. I really don't like the ones that I've seen at these places because they have no water holding capacity and there's no soil and everything leaks out. And the wood, to me, and the materials that they're using, it's not going to last. And to me, that would give a bad experience for a lot of beginning producers. But, for those, even college kids and stuff like that want to put one of these things on their back porch or something like that. You could put it on a back deck, out of an apartment, in a small container, and you've got something to work with.
Yeah, like you said, we've got it from small area, and if you want to expand, you can maybe even take it into a market gardening aspect too.
Yes. I've given my plans to a lot of community garden type folks and stuff like that. And then also, to me, it's almost makes it simple for gardeners, beginning gardeners, because you don't want to overwater, you don't want to underwater, so you just basically dump in the water, and then basically it overflows where it needs to, and that's it. And you just enjoy the experience after that.
Is there any drawbacks whatsoever that you've run into since you've been talking about it, and then also you have some yourself?
I've been doing this for, again, probably about 12 years, and I thought that I might get some inorganic salt buildup from the chemicals or from the inorganic fertilizers and stuff like that. I thought I might have a problem with that, but I haven't seen it. Another common question that I get is I'm using perforated pipe, which has a tiny little slit in it, which is great. But I have a lot of people that ask me about it filling up with soil. And no, I've never had an issue with it. And when I think about it, I mean, when you do a perforated pipe to like do drainage, you have water coming into it, and that's going to carry silt and mineral deposits and things like that. But this is always full of water. So it's not like it's pulling material in, because it's distributing it out. So I've torn these beds out after having them up for a while, and I've looked into the pipes, and it's an insignificant amount of material in the bottom of the pipe, sedimentation-wise.
Yeah, that's a good question to make sure there's not any soils that clog up those pipes there. Yeah.
Which is another reason why I use peat moss. I really like peat moss. And you don't need to have a huge open area that has access to the bottom. I mean, just a little bit of peat moss and a little crack will wick that water up 9 inches.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say, I think we've covered everything, and if anybody has any other information, we'll link those publications down in our show notes. Okay. So we want to make sure that you know about that. Thank you, Dr. Higgins, for being on the podcast.
Not a problem. Glad to do it.
I can't wait to hear more. So thanks for coming.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Thank you to our special guest, Dr. Steve Higgins, for sharing his insights. I hope our enlightening discussion has sparked your interest in self-wicking gardening for your Kentucky garden. For those wanting to delve deeper into these topics, don't forget to check out our show notes for episode 43 over on the blog at warrencountyagriculture.com. I've linked the 2 publications from our discussion today in our show notes. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback is invaluable in reaching more garden enthusiasts and enhancing our content just for you. We always welcome your questions, feedback, and suggestions for future podcast episodes. So let's grow this community together. Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Until next time, happy gardening.
Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast with Kristin Hildabrand. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts to catch future segments of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Gardeners, keep on digging and learning more about gardening so the sun shines brighter over your Kentucky garden. The Sunshine Gardening Podcasts with Kristin Hildabrand is a production of the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.